Hello and welcome to the Business of Happiness podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Tarryn MacCarthy, and today is going to be a phenomenal day. Have you ever said yes to a patient, not because it was the best decision clinically, but because you didn't want to let them down? Not because it was the best decision for you and your boundaries, but because you didn't want them to think less of you or to like you less, or because it felt too uncomfortable to say no. And what if that moment, that tiny decision, ended up costing you your peace, your presence, your self-confidence, your power for the rest of the day, for the rest of the week, maybe even longer? And what if this keeps happening? And it might not even be about clinical choices necessarily, and it isn't about clinical decision. It's about integrity. It's about your integrity with your higher self. It's about your nervous system alignment and how these kind of people-pleasing tendencies or need for external validation, which we have been completely indoctrinated in, can quietly steal our joy and our clarity. I'm going to share with you this beautiful story of a client of mine who is anonymous, of course. I'm so grateful to her for sharing the story because I think so many of us can find ourselves reflected in it. I know I could. She was treating this patient who really trusted her for a long time. I think they've been, she's been her dentist for a while. And what happened was she needed some teeth extracted. And leading up to the appointment, the patient said, I just want to let you know I'm on a new bisphosphonate, which is absolutely appropriate for her to share. And I think it was even at the prompting of my client who said, what's your medical, let's do some updates on your medical history. And immediately my client said, okay, well, that's not something I feel comfortable treating. So I'm going to refer you to an oral surgeon. Here it is. I love this oral surgeon. Great. The patient called back and said, you know what? I really trust you. You really are the best dentist I've ever had. I've not had great experiences with oral surgeons, and I really feel safe in your hands, and I really trust you, and I know that you'll treat this the best way. So I just would rather you do the extractions. And of course, my client felt so validated and, proud of herself. And also, it feels good to receive that acknowledgement from our patients. I've been there. It feels good to have formed that bond and that trust. And especially because this patient also said, I don't feel comfortable going to the oral surgeon. This doesn't feel safe to me. I feel much safer in your hands. So my client said, okay, let's schedule it. And what she noticed in the day following is irritability in herself. She was snapping at people. She was not happy. She was a little anxious the whole time. She couldn't focus on things. She was irritated. Things were distracting her. She just didn't feel like herself. And she was chatting with another dentist that she works with, and she was saying, all day and maybe it was a couple days later, she said, I just can't get back to myself. I feel a little bit distracted all the time. And I have this great morning meditation. I listen to myself all day and I feed myself positive affirmations. And she had some beautiful practices to really boost her self-confidence that she's really learned after working for a while within the Radical Happiness container here at the Business of Happiness. And she said, but today and this week, I just feel off. And as she was talking to her friend who she works with, she realized, and she traced it back to that decision of saying yes to her patient when really she wanted to say no. And what she did subsequently is she realized, I can't live like this anymore. I can't live out of integrity with myself. I wanted to say no. I said no. And then I went back on my word. And then I gave in. And she said, you know what, I'm going to just call the patient. And that's what she did. She called her up and she said, look, I know you really trust me and I'm honored and I'm so grateful to have us with that relationship where we trust one another. And I need you to trust me with this decision. This is actually a bigger deal. And I do need you to be seeing an oral surgeon. The patient immediately rebutted and said, well, then I'm not going to do it. I'm just not going to go. And then my client said, I understand. And I'll tell you how important it is to have these teeth removed, and that is your decision, and it will not be me who does it. I really need you to see an oral surgeon. And when she had finished that conversation, the weight and the stress of making a decision out of alignment with herself dissipated. And she realized immediately how much calmer she felt. There was a part of her that whispered, was that unprofessional? Should I not have told her that much? And still, even with that little whisper of self-doubt, she still felt so much better. The result was this relief of the lingering stress that she wasn't even consciously aware of. And I just want you to just hear this story. And how often have you said yes when you really meant no? Or even said no and then retracted and gone back and said yes when everything inside of you wanted to say no. And the other part of this is recognizing that impact on your body and on your stress and really on your soul. Because integrity is a felt experience. You don't just know something's wrong, you feel it. You feel it in your body, whether it's a tight chest or shallow breathing or racing thoughts or exhaustion or irritability or snapping in your behavior, snapping at other people, or just not being able to focus, or waking you up in the middle of the night and you're not sure why. You're constantly thinking about work or you're obsessing over little things. Start micromanaging again. Your nervous system is your first alert system. And learning to recognize those physical signs of just being off is such a superpower. The need for validation, for external validation and approval, can sometimes override our inner wisdom. It happens all the time. We're human beings. And giving yourself grace is so important. Oh my gosh. Let's just pause for a moment and recognize that, because maybe you're remembering a time where you said yes instead of saying no, and now you're beating yourself up or you're trying to justify it. And I'm just going to give you so much permission to offer yourself grace and forgiveness, because you're human. And we've all done this, and I still do this. But here is the reframe. What if paying attention to that discomfort in your body when you recognize it's off, instead of facing it with self-beratement or shame or justification, what if we saw it as an opportunity to shift, to come back into alignment? What if we saw it as a beautiful signal from your body that this is another moment of getting to know yourself more? Because the real power is in course correcting. It's okay to change your mind. It's okay to learn from that uncomfortable experience in your body. It's okay to say yes when you meant no, and then feel the discomfort and then say, oh my gosh, that's out of alignment. My higher self knows that's not what I wanted. My inner wisdom is screaming at me right now. Let me realign with that decision. Let's realign with my integrity. That, my friend, is a strength, not a weakness. Let it be okay that these moments happen. The discomfort gets to be diagnostic. It's when something feels off that we get more data. Wow, I didn't realize how strongly I felt about that. That's not something I want to do in my practice. And there's a very big difference between growth and stretching yourself outside of your comfort zone, right? Because anytime we try something new, it's a little bit uncomfortable. And that is such a beautiful place to be, reminding ourselves we're safe in that discomfort. But there's a very different feeling. And I wonder if you can just remember that now, right now. Can you remember the difference in your body, in your heart, in your body, what it felt like when you were stretching yourself because something was new and it felt a little scary and there were butterflies, versus stretching yourself beyond your place of integrity when something feels off? There is a felt sense difference between those two things, and learning to discern that body wisdom is such a superpower. So I want you to pause with me for a moment. Where in your life right now are you saying yes when you really mean no? Maybe it's a patient that you don't feel comfortable treating, or maybe it's a procedure that you don't feel comfortable treating or pursuing. Maybe it's a team request that's actually draining you, or a friend request. Somebody's asking you to do something that you just don't have the energy or the space or the bandwidth to do, and you've said yes again. Maybe it's your kid's school. Maybe it's an expectation that you've silently accepted at home because it's just easier than having a confrontational conversation. And you just thought, I'm just going to do it, even though in your body, you know you want to say no. And can you tell the difference? Can you remember a time where you tried something new and it was a little scary? Maybe you were putting yourself outside of your regular comfort zone by approaching somebody at a convention or a study club and engaging in conversation. Maybe you're not an extrovert and making that new connection was a little stretch. And can you tell the difference between those two things of stretching yourself and expanding yourself and growth versus being out of alignment with your values? And often it's after we've taken the action that we get the greater wisdom. Because when we stretch ourselves a little bit and it feels a little scary and uncomfortable and you do it and then it feels thrilling and you're proud of yourself, you know, it's the other side of that decision that feels really good. But when we do something that's out of integrity with our values, we get that deep knowing inside of ourselves. That's when we get to choose realignment. And it's great information because very few of us sit down on a daily basis and say, okay, what are my values? Where do I stand on these hundreds and hundreds of perspectives? Where do I stand? But often it's life experience that allows us that reflection only if we choose to see it that way. What's really interesting, I mentioned in the story that my client was saying, you know, I felt like it was a little uncomfortable to have this conversation with her, and it might even be unprofessional. And I felt like it was going to be hard for me to tell her no once I'd already said yes. But I really needed to explain why I said yes in the first place. And that's what felt unprofessional. And what's so interesting is often even those misconceptions about what we should or shouldn't be doing as dentists prevent us from being in alignment. Notice there was a second choice there. It felt uncomfortable to call that patient. And when she did, it felt so much better because that was what was in alignment with her higher self. I remember so many times in practice feeling like a splintered human, like I was living multiple personalities or multiple lives. I'd show up as dentist here and mom here, and I didn't know where I was in between. Or sometimes I'd be in rooms and feel like no one even saw me or recognized me because I didn't know what it was like to be a mom and a dentist and a business owner and, you know, all the complexities of my life. And there were times where I felt like I lost myself in that. The way that I found myself was through recognizing the gifts of each of these moments, paying attention to my body, paying attention to the wisdom within me, and getting really comfortable with being still and quiet enough to hear what does feel in alignment to me. Because here's the truth. Every time you say yes out of fear of letting someone down, fear of being judged, fear of not being liked, you fragment your own sense of self. And that feels so uncomfortable and disconnected. And I think it's one of the biggest reasons we feel unhappy as women in dentistry is because we don't even know where we stand anymore. It shows up in your body. It shows up in your energy level. It shows up in how much energy you have at the end of the day and how present you can be for those precious moments, how present you can be for your patients, but also how present you can be for your family or yourself. But when you come back to yourself, when you remember who you are and you act from that place, you make choices and decisions from that place, everything begins to shift. You start to show up whole. You lead from within. You move through your day with more clarity, more power, more confidence, more integrity. And the more you choose to come back to yourself, the more effortless that feels. I've been there. And yes, I've said yes out of fear when I really wanted to say no. And I felt that anxiety in my chest afterwards, and the distraction and the lack of sleep and the irritation and the impatience. And I've also found the profound relief, the coming home to myself when I finally realigned. You deserve to feel whole, aligned, unshakably yourself. You deserve to feel good, because when you feel good, that is when you can do good. Have a phenomenal day. Bye-bye. Thank you for listening to the Business of Happiness podcast. If this episode brought you new perspective and value, I invite you to subscribe so that you catch all upcoming episodes and leave us a review. And if you know of a friend or colleague who could benefit from this perspective, share this episode with them and empower their day. For more information about the Business of Happiness and the Radical Happiness for Practitioners course, find me on www.thebizofhappiness.com. See you there.